Hi, hello, and welcome to Rebel Unicorn Crafts. Today I'm going to be showing you how I made this wood flower bouquet using Sola Wood flowers and supplies that I had in my studio. Some of these you'll probably have, some you might not, but it didn't require any extra shopping and it was really fun to make. The supplies you're going to need are the wood flowers, a bowl, some water, craft paint, a mixing device, and then to make the leaves as well as the stems, you're going to need some floral wire, floral tape, watercolor paper, watercolor, and some hot glue. If possible, I also recommend saving a couple egg crates for drying these flowers. They're very handy. Then I collected the flowers I had. I have some of these bigger lotus flowers and some smaller ones that look kind of like rosettes, and formed a plan for the colors I wanted. The first step of that plan is how am I going to dye these? In my previous video, if you are curious, I went over a few different methods using different types of paints and dyes and methods on how to dye these different flowers, and I decided that the best was to dilute craft paint in water and to dip these in whole. And they turn out like this. This is one that I dyed a nice light pink, and I like that light color. I'm going to be using acrylic craft paints, both the Craftsmart and Anita's brand, to mix up the colors that I want in my bouquet. So for my bouquet, I want 3 colors of flowers. For these lotus flowers, I have quite a few of them, so I want 5 of them to be a light pink, and the other half I'm going to do as a purple, and then the little rosettes I'm going to do kind of a brighter yellow color for a pop of color. I'm going for a very pale or pastel pink, so a very subtle pink. So I'm going to mix up a pink magenta color and some white, and I'm going to do this where I put quite a bit of paint in, but not as much as is maybe suggested initially, because I don't want to overdo this, and I really mix it in, and then I'm using these bottom petals to test as I go, because the color in the bowl is not going to be the color that shows up on those flowers, and that's because of a few reasons. One is the dilution of the paint. It's not going to be as pigmented as it appears because it's going to soak in, and 2 is there is a base color to those flowers, so you need to be able to adjust to change your color in order to make it fit what it's going on to. And you'll actually see this later when I do the yellow ones. I really had to make an adjustment there. But go ahead and mix and test until you are completely happy. Once happy, we're ready to actually dip these flowers in. So you want to make sure that your bowl is going to be big enough that you can actually at least dip each side in completely and kind of do this motion. I didn't want to have to use a huge tub because then I'd have to use extra paint, but you want to make sure that you can submerge and kind of scoop this water into there without running too much into the bottom of your container. Also, if you don't like the shape of your flower, because once you get them wet, they become a little more pliable, you can gently reshape those petals and then set them in the egg crate to dry. We'll repeat this step for the remaining flowers that we want to be this color. My next color that I want to do is a kind of a pastel purple, a little bit more pigmented, but not hugely different, and so I'm actually going to use that same water as a base, and that will help kind of keep it in the same color family. You can only do this if you're using like colors, so pink and purple are very closely related. You wouldn't want to change from like a yellow to a purple because that will get really muddy. But I'm going to do the same process of mixing up this color and testing until I'm happy with the color as it appears on the petals, and then I will dip all of these just like we did the first set. I'm really happy with how these two colors complement each other, and they're a little bit bright and a little bit more toned down than each other, but I do want one color to be really bright and just pop out. So the next thing we're going to do is mix up our yellow color. In mixing up this color, I wanted it to be a bright yellow with a little bit of pastel just to fit in, so I did yellow and white, and I did actually add a small squeeze of that pink to it to kind of tone it down a little bit, but I'm going to skip ahead and show you. I had to readjust this color because as they sat, the yellowness of the wood somehow kind of gave them a greenish tint, and so I had to re-dip my flowers in a more orange-ish solution so that they ended up actually fitting in with the color palette I had. You can already see there the color of the yellow was not quite right, so I went ahead and I adjusted that, and once I re-dipped them, I think it looked a lot better. I tried just redipping just to resaturate in general a second time, but that didn't change it quite enough, so I did have to update the color that I was using. Once I'd updated the color though, I think they looked a lot better and more in line with the color palette of my overall bouquet. While my flowers were drying, I wanted to get a head start on making the leaves, and there are all sorts of solutions on things you can buy and use, but I decided to use 140-pound watercolor paper and some watercolors. I went ahead and mixed up 3 different kind of toned greens, a yellow green, a blue green, and a muted green, and I just covered several pieces of paper with this kind of mishmash of colors, and I ended up going over each side because I had to flip them over and paint the other side, but I went ahead and painted each side about 3 different times so that I got the saturation level I wanted, and I just kind of changed and adjusted based on what I was going for. I intentionally made these not super uniform because leaves have some natural kind of variations to their colors and shapes, so I wanted them to feel a little more natural. Once I'd painted both sides to the colors I wanted, I went ahead and sketched out some kind of general shapes and sizes for leaves that I thought were appropriate for the flowers in the bouquet. This is not really a bouquet that is based in reality, but I wanted to have kind of the general shapes of the leaves, so I looked those up. The lotus petal ones are kind of rounded with an indent in the middle, whereas the rose ones are more the traditional leaf shape with slightly jagged edges, and I tried to get at least one of the lotus leaves. A few of them I did 2 per flower, as well as 2 per flower for the roses. Once you trace them, you just want to cut around them. Remember, this is nature, so nothing has to be absolutely perfect, but repeat this step for all the leaves that you're going to need until you have enough. Now that I have enough leaves and all my flowers are dried, it is time to start assembling these together. So at this point, we're going to need our floral wire, aluminum wire. I'm using an aluminum, it's like a fencing type wire, hot glue, and floral tape. So the first thing I want to do is use this floral wire to attach to the leaves that I will eventually attach to the stems. And I take a piece of this and fold it over so that there's a loop that the glue can kind of hold on to, because otherwise if we just use the one single part, it can easily just slip out. And I take some snippers and I just make a bunch of these little guys here so that I can put them on. Now, you can either glue these directly and leave the glue and the wire exposed, or you can do what I did, which was to cut some extra pieces to kind of hide the area where you're gluing them together that's on the bottom. Totally up to you. It might be an unnecessary step, but that's what I did. Use a different type of glue that would stick to both this kind of plastic coated wire and the paper, then you might be able to use that as the floral or the leaf stem. But another step that I did that's optional was I folded these leaves over to kind of give them a little more life and structure to them. And then I repeated this with all of the other leaves. There are a variety of supplies you could use. I like the idea of using wire-based stems as well as stems for the leaves so that I could move my leaves and the stems around to kind of fit into my vase, but you could use wooden parts, especially for the stems, something like a wooden dowel. Pipe cleaners would work really well to attach the leaves to them as well. What you want to do is just make sure that it looks how you want it, so use what you have. But I do recommend using some sort of wire if possible, especially to attach the leaves, because that's the part that you're going to move around the most. Now it's time to create the stems. I'm using this aluminum wire. It's technically like a fencing wire that I bought from a local farm supply store a while ago for some different projects, and I am poking a hole and using some hot glue to attach it. It actually does seem to stick to both the wire as well as the flower very well, and I'm going to let these dry to set to make sure they are nice and secure. Now this is where you could use thin dowels or some other sort of wire, or you could actually use old hangers, wire hangers. There's a lot of different things you could use here. This is just what I'm using. I've pre-cut these to about 12 to 16 inches. The final step of this process is to coat these wires if you want. If you were using a dowel, you could paint these green, but I have some of this floral tape, and this is the most tedious part of this process. So make sure you take breaks during this part of the process because your fingers will hurt. But this floral tape contains basically a wax type adhesive that when you stretch is exposed. So you want to stretch it a bit and then you kind of spin and pull and it will cover nicely down. And the advantage of using this tape is then we can add our leaves at the stages of the stem that we want by just pushing the wire we attached directly to the stem and then running that tape over and over and over again, and it just becomes part of the stem. And now all parts of my stem and leaves are going to be fully malleable, so I can change their direction, the way they tilt, the way that the leaves face, and I can really make a beautiful bouquet from that. Once you have completed that process for each one of your flowers, I added about 2 leaves to each of my roses and 1 leaf to each of my lotus flowers because I wanted some greenery. Now it's time to just go ahead and arrange these by putting them into, I've got this really cute yellow pitcher, and you can kind of place them in. If you need to, you can trim or fold over the edges and find the places that they fit, and then you can move the leaves so until you like how everything looks. I chose to fold over the bottom of mine to change the height because I didn't know if in the future I would use something different to put these into, and maybe I wouldn't want them to be shorter. I actually really like how this turned out. It's a really kind of bright spot, and it's been in my studio now for a while, and I don't know, I might move it up into my office. But it's nice and full, the greenery really helps, and I like the color palette. And overall, if you are interested in making more of a sustainable flower bouquet, as far as something that will have longevity, this is great. I kind of wish I had done this in a larger scale on a wreath, something for spring or summer, because I do like to have fresh flower bouquets from local flowers. but I think this would make a great wreath or a great accent piece if you don't want to have to constantly change or clean up petals. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you have a magically creative day.